Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, from Rustad's rebate to the NDP's Axe the Facts, the election slogans are coming in fast and furious. We'll hear about those announcements and from various guests throughout the show with what they're looking for in this election. We'll talk to the BC Chamber of Commerce, an affordable housing advocate, the Union of BC Indian Chiefs as well. And we're asking you, what is important to you in this election? Call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today.
Thank you so much for hosting us.
Right here. Good to meet you.
Yeah, good to see you too. Yeah.
On this third day of the election campaign, NDP Leader David Ee started his day at a home in Burnaby to hear constituents' concerns about health care. And he made this announcement about doctors' notes for workers who need time off because they're sick.
We're going to ban the practice of employers requiring doctor's notes for absenteeism from work if it's fewer than 5 days. This is something that people often have to pay out of pocket for. In fact, they have to get out of bed if they're sick, even if they wouldn't go to their doctor, it's just the flu, and then drag themselves into the doctor's office with the flu to pay for a note.
Ee also announced plans to let pharmacists treat more conditions, and he pledged to modernize the system that doctors use to renew their patients' medications. Ee said the NDP would, quote, axe the facts. Meanwhile, in Surrey,
what we are announcing today is what we're calling the Rustad rebate.
And the BC Conservatives leader, John Rustad, announced his party's plan to support renters and homeowners.
We are going to have a tax deduction of up to $3,000 per month for people that are paying the rent or paying their mortgages. If it's used entirely for every home in the province, would be approximately $3.5 billion in tax relief for people in British Columbia.
Now, the party says the rebate would start at $1,500 a month in budget 2026, and that figure would increase by $500 a month a year to reach the final total of $3,000 a month. The BC Conservatives say it would be the largest ever tax cut for renters and homeowners in this province. Leaders from a number of business and industry groups have been calling for an economic plan in this provincial election. And we're going to hear from various voices throughout this show to find out what they are looking for as we take your calls. What is important to you in this provincial election? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. I'm joined now by Fiona Famulak, the CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Michelle.
Thank you for being here. What is your perspective, your take on the state of BC's economy as we head into this election?
Well, as context for your listeners, the BC Chamber of Commerce commissioned a series of 3 public opinion polls to better understand British Columbians' sentiments, perspectives on key economic issues as we head into the October 19 election. We've shared 2 polls so far that have been really very, very enlightening. The first poll confirmed that British Columbians understand the link between a strong economy and their provincial government's ability to fund public services that are essential to them, such as healthcare, such as education, such as roads and bridges and all the infrastructure that we need. They also shared with us that they are concerned about the underlying economic conditions, the environment that needs to be present in order for businesses to succeed, all of which was doubled down on in poll number 2. Poll number 2 tells us 3 things: that British Columbians believe that governments, local, provincial, and federal, have a role to play in business success. 31% of employers tell us that tax reductions would have the greatest impact on business success. And British Columbians, somewhere between 65 and 77%, depending on the sector, believe that leveraging our natural resource sectors will create jobs and will help deal with the affordability issues that we're all facing. So very enlightening. And we speak with businesses many, many times a day. We represent 36,000 businesses across British Columbia. And the feelings of British Columbians are very aligned with what we hear from our businesses across the province.
And what impact is that having then? Why is it important to implement what you're calling for?
Well, we're calling for, as a provincial association, we're calling for a reduction in the cost of doing business. It's very high here in BC. It's prohibitively high. And we're also calling for a reset on our regulatory regime because the investment environment here is very uncertain, which means it's very difficult for businesses to plan and invest. And that's why we're seeing businesses either downscale or close, or in some cases leave British Columbia for other jurisdictions because they simply cannot make it work here in BC. That's important for us, for our message to be heard on behalf of businesses, and therefore it's imperative that the party leaders articulate a comprehensive vision for our economic success, and more importantly, I think, how they are going to achieve it. How are they going to balance the books so that we can achieve economic growth while also living within our means?
Okay, and so what do you make of what you've heard so far on the economy?
Well, the parties are now beginning to share their platforms, which is helpful. However, election promises are just that; they are election promises. So we want to double down and ensure that the parties are sharing a comprehensive economic vision and specifically how they will create economic growth, how will they create investment stability so that business prosper, British Columbians thrive, and our communities flourish.
Do you have the sense that we haven't heard a lot on the economy, as you know, issues like public safety, housing, and the toxic drug crisis have been so front and center? Do you have a sense that it's not been at the top of the agenda for the parties?
Well, the issues that have been touched on by the leaders to this point are very important. We hear from British Columbians that the top three priorities are, in order, healthcare, the cost of living, and housing. So, the party leaders are focused on that, but there's a laundry list of issues that they are concerned about. And as I mentioned right out of the top, we know the British Columbians understand clearly the link between a strong economy and their provincial government's ability to fund the public services that they need. And that's really the link that we need our leaders to understand so that they articulate a clear vision and how they are going to create economic success across the province and balance our books so that we can live within our means.
Fiona Famulak, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Michelle.
Fiona Famulak is CEO of the BC Chamber of Commerce. In a few minutes, we'll speak with Grand Chief Stewart Philip from the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. And at just after 12:30, we'll speak with affordable housing advocate Stephanie Allen. And toward the end of the show, we'll also hear from business improvement associations and what they're looking for in this provincial election. So a lot of voices today to find out what they're seeking. And we're asking you as well, what is important to you in this provincial election? The announcements are going to come in every day. So what are you going to be looking for? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone as well. If you'd like to email us, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. It's a quarter after the hour here on BC Today. And thanks for sending us your emails on what issues matter to you in this election. Victor writes, the cost of living, including groceries and fuel, affordable housing as well, the drug crisis and availability of drugs, as well as safe injection sites. Darlene writes, the main issue for everyone in this and future elections should be climate change. The leader of the BC Conservatives was ejected from the BC Liberals/United Party because he denied climate change was a thing. I do not like the extremes the BC Conservatives represent. Thank you very much for your email. Now, a note on that, John Rustad has been saying that he believes climate change is an issue and that humans have contributed to it, but he doesn't believe it is at a crisis level. That's what he said on this program. And we got an email from Jagger who writes, I ran for my local BC NDP nomination a few months ago for the election. I tried to raise a lot of youth issues like climate change and mental health, but was mostly dismissed. The Conservatives have been good at creating rhetoric that resonates with young people, and Rustad often talks of how half of young people are thinking of leaving BC, but I haven't seen any substance on how he would fix this. What are the parties doing to get young people involved? Do any of them have young candidates running? Are those candidates in winnable ridings? And what are their stances on lowering the voting age? Thank you for that as well. And all your emails, again, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. Today, we are asking what is important to you in this provincial election. Taking your calls, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. This is BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks for being with us. And we continue our election campaign coverage on this third day. And we're joined now by Grand Chief Stewart Philip, President of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. Grand Chief, good afternoon. Thank you for being here.
Good afternoon.
What to you are the main issues you'd like to see addressed in this election?
Without question, the Indigenous First Nations people in British Columbia would like to see continuity. We've made amazing progress over the last number of years under the Horgan and Eby governments. BC is the only jurisdiction that has legislation in regard to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act, commonly referred to as DRIPA. And that is foundation. We've been able to make a lot of progress in environment, in the opioid crisis war, as well as agreements that would see our ability to fully engage in the forward economic activities of the province through what we refer to as Section 6 and 7 agreements that spring from DRIPA or the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. We find it absolutely disturbing that Mr. Rustad is on record saying that he would repeal DRIPA if he were elected as Premier of British Columbia, and totally destroy all of the progress we've made in the last several years.
He was asked about that, about reconciliation this morning at his availability, and he spoke about economic outcomes and improved economic outcomes, referring to what he called economic reconciliation as the path forward. What do you make of that focus?
Well, it's not that we haven't heard that before, but it's got to be real. It's got to ensure that the Indigenous voice in the development of the resources in this province is acknowledged as having a jurisdictional interest or legal right in the lands and resources that comprise the province. And believe me, the BC Conservatives do not recognize our constitutional and legal authority, because they're trying to repeal the very foundation of those rights through repealing DRIPA.
You mentioned the opioid crisis ongoing, of course, as a top issue. What do you make of, in recent weeks, or just over the last couple of weeks now, this promise from NDP Leader David Ee that he would expand services when it comes to forced treatment or mandatory treatment, which has been a stance already from the BC Conservatives. What do you make of that as a potential solution or tool in addressing this crisis?
Well, firstly, we need to realize that the opioid crisis is global. Certainly, a North American social issue that's having devastating impacts on all levels of government. I have a personal interest. 6 years ago, I lost my son on his 42nd birthday to a carfentanil overdose. And I support Premier Ee and his initiative that was currently announced a number of days ago. We have to take absolutely every step to address this crisis. And we simply can't shy away from this terrible opioid crisis that's taking so many of our people. As First Nations leaders, we spend an inordinate time at our local cemetery, putting away our young people and people that have suffered from overdoses. We need treatment. We need more treatment centers, particularly for youth. That's absolutely got to happen. The capital expenditures and budgets to hire trained professionals.
When it comes to mandatory treatment, there have been concerns around infringements on autonomy and on personal rights, and what that would look like, what impact it might have on a patient, after exiting mandatory treatment. What are your thoughts on that?
That was on what?
Concerns around mandatory treatment and personal rights.
Oh,
and
yes,
whether it's
yes,
effective.
of course. Again, I absolutely support any and all efforts to address this, this terrible crisis. And, I don't think we can, pick and choose, different options that are brought forward. We know that a lot of the work that has been undertaken is a consequence of contacting other jurisdictions, not only in North America, but in other countries that are dealing with similar issues. And, my son was 6'3", he was 240 pounds. He was an amazing individual, and he's gone. And, if that option had been available, he might still be here.
I'm very sorry for your loss, Grand Chief, and over these 6 years, the grief that you have had. I really appreciate your joining us today to talk about the policies you'd like to see, and I'm sure we'll talk again. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That's Grand Chief Stewart Philip, President of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. Taking your calls, asking you what is important to you in this provincial election. Our number again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Let's go to Morton, who's calling from Burnaby. What's the biggest issue for you, Morton?
Hi. The biggest issue, I think, for me and for anyone who's looking to the future is education. Because if we don't get education right, we can't really move forward. And there are some systemic problems with how education is funded in our province that are largely invisible to the public. And if we address those particular issues, there would be a big change in what is possible in education.
What are the problems with that funding?
And specifically, it has to do with the portables. You know, the thing that you hear about all the time,
right,
where the schools run out of space and they have to build portables. So
in
the
Surrey,
way the system works, so the Surrey is a problem right now. This problem is going to become an issue for everyone. So it'll become a problem for Burnaby. It'll become a problem for Vancouver. It'll become a problem for anywhere where there's a lot of people coming. The reason why it's a problem is because when schools are built, they're built by the province. And the school districts get paid a certain amount of money per student in their district per year. When the districts run out of space, the district has to take money out of their operating budget to pay those portables to build them. Each portable costs somewhere between $500,000 and $800,000 to build, and that money comes out of the budget that was allocated to be spent on education. So when a district builds 10 portables in a year, they are short millions of dollars to do education. And because the districts are mandated by law to balance their budgets, the budgets don't really show you how much the portables cost and how much the portables are cutting out of the budget. So when you see a portable built, you have to realize in that school district, every single new portable is a budget shortfall of between $500,000 and $800,000.
Okay. Are you a teacher, Morton?
No, I'm on PAC at my
I
son's
see.
school.
Okay.
And I've been investigating this because I've been trying to understand why the budgets keep getting cut for everything. Like at our school, they're going to cut the maintenance staff. They've already cut teaching hours. They're talking about starting to move kids around or maybe chop up the day like they are in Surrey. And I realized it's actually not because the schools are significantly underfunded. It's because the money that was meant to go to education is going to build buildings because the province isn't building the buildings and leaning on the school districts to build them, but then the school districts don't have the funding to build them.
Okay, so and the stopgap measure of building portables is taking away from that funding. Really interesting, and I'm glad that you've raised it as someone who's a member of the PAC there, Morton. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. That's Morton in Burnaby. Chris is on the line in Victoria. And what is important to you in this election, Chris?
Yeah, thanks very much for taking my call. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
We sure can.
Yeah, the biggest issue, and I think by a long shot for me, is the climate crisis. And, you know, I've been listening to BC Today and CBC regularly for a while now. And for quite a while, there were a lot of people bringing the climate crisis up as a major issue. And I'm really disappointed to see that the climate crisis seems to be falling off of people's radar as a major issue to consider in this election. I'm not saying that people are totally ignoring it, but it's definitely, you know, down second, third, fourth on their list of major issues. And in my opinion, this issue trumps all other issues. If this isn't dealt with in a number of years, nothing else is really going to matter because, you know, we're not going to have much of a world left to live in. You know, we've seen massive changes in our climate in the last few years in our local environment, and even bigger, really noticeable changes internationally. And, you know, the fact that this is not the biggest issue on everyone's mind, you know, scares me and just unfortunately makes me think that too big of a percentage of our population is looking too short term, and they're
looking
not,
at maybe affordability as an issue.
Yeah, well, you know, I appreciate there are lots of other big issues out there, and there are lots of things that are affecting people immediately today, right now. But you know, this climate crisis is real, and we're seeing changes on a yearly basis that are really significant locally, but also huge globally. And you know, if we're not banding together as a society to try to fix this, I think we're going to be in big trouble, and some of these other issues might not matter.
Yeah, Chris, thank you very much for raising that. Glad to hear from you in Victoria. You take care.
Thank you.
That's Chris in Victoria. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see as the platforms are laid out from each of the three parties what their plans are for dealing with the climate crisis. That's Chris joining us from Victoria. This is BC Today here on CBC. I'm Michelle Elliott, and thanks so much for being with us. I hope you're having a good day. We are talking about the provincial election, day 3 now, as the campaign kicked off on Saturday with the writ dropping then, and very busy. We had NDP leader David Ee speaking this morning, BC Conservative leader John Rustad a little later, and at 11 o'clock, BC Green Party leader Sonia Furstenau was speaking to media as well. So the leaders are busy out in the communities, and we're asking you what you make of what you're hearing so far and what is important to you. Our numbers again, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, pound 690 on your cell phone. And coming up, we're going to hear a little bit more of the latest on the campaign, and we'll talk as well to affordable housing advocate Stephanie Allen. We'll hear from the Business Improvement Associations of BC and their concerns when it comes to public safety. That's later on in the half hour. And we're going to go to Johanna, who's calling from Kootenay Lake. That is all coming up here on BC Today, right after this CBC News Update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The NDP has shared a video of BC Conservative leader John Rustad vaccine against COVID-19. The video shows Rustad addressing a camera and saying vaccine mandates were not so much about achieving herd immunity or stopping the spread of infection as they were about, quote, shaping opinion and control of the population. The video shared by the NDP is an edited version of a video posted online by the BC Public Service Employees for Freedom, a group of former workers who believe they were discriminated against because they did not get vaccinated. And people in a small community outside Burns Lake and around the province are celebrating the return of a 6-year-old girl who survived being lost in the woods alone for several days. The child had been reported missing Thursday from outside her home in South Bank. The girl was located in a forested area near her home. She was reunited with her parents and taken to hospital, but is believed to be in good health. And now the forecast on the north coast. Lots of rain this afternoon with strong winds and a high of 15. Highs around 20 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, rain tapering off this afternoon, then cloudy with a high of 20 as well. Highs around 24 and clearing in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, mainly sunny with a high of 26. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, clearing this afternoon with a high of 19. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Rob.
You're welcome.
That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. We are asking you for your thoughts and your priorities in this provincial election throughout the hour here on BC Today, and getting a lot of emails to Adrian writes, I was listening this afternoon to the CEO from the Chamber of Commerce. I always find it interesting that they always blame the government for making conditions undesirable for business to thrive in certain areas. Being from the Chamber of Commerce, her interest will be to protect business, but who's there to protect the consumers? I'm tired of listening to big business complain about what governments can do to make things better for them. And David writes, my voting priorities are strengthening Indigenous rights and providing more resources for reconciliation, addressing climate change transformation in our communities, prioritizing the poor first, affordable housing for all, like public and co-op housing, and stopping houselessness, improving city, regional, and rural mobility and transit, so affordable and free public transit, support to small business and community co-ops, improving core funding for communities, and creating more community health centers as well. Thank you very much for all of your emails. Lots more are coming in. We'll go through them throughout the show. Again, our email address is bctoday@cbc.ca. Lisa writes, I think climate change is the most important. It also affects food prices, crops get destroyed, etc. It affects insurance costs for folks who have homes as fires and floods destroy. Yes, rental is important to be kept low and food prices, but focusing on climate will only assist that. Okay, thank you for your email, Lisa. Again, bctoday@cbc.ca. Well, as you heard in the news update, today the BC NDP published a video that they say shows John Rustad meeting a, quote, anti-vax group. Now, here's a clip from the video, which the NDP says shows Rustad commenting on the COVID vaccines and Dr. Bonnie Henry.
I've had 3 shots of the vaccine. I wish I hadn't, quite frankly. That's one of the things that's changed in my thinking. The so-called vaccine, the COVID mRNA shots. When I talked to Bonnie Henry about it, I started to realize that it wasn't so much about, trying to get herd immunity or trying to stop the spread, but it was more around shaping opinion and control on the population.
Now, CBC News has not independently verified the source of the video. Rustad was asked about it repeatedly today at his availability in Surrey, and as you'll hear, he changed the topic in some of his answers.
You've recently made some comments about Dr. Bonnie Henry and the so-called vaccine and wishing you'd never had the shots. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you think would have happened in BC if people didn't get the shots and Are you suggesting that everything would have been the same in terms of death and illness rates without widespread vaccinations?
So, thank you for that. And I see the NDP are attacking me about this, and I understand how they want to distract away from the real issues. For example, we're talking about the real issues. David Ee was just in the Tri-Cities just the other day in Langley. And at the time, there was a gang-style shooting that happened tragically in there. And no comment from a premier who, quite frankly, wrote the book on how to sue the police. So I expected he wouldn't comment about that, but he does want to distract away from the fact that this is the most important step that we can take as a government to be able to help renters and homeowners to be able to afford their life here in British Columbia, and to be able to hope once again to be able to have that dream of owning a home, and that's what we're focused on.
Thank you. Brianna with CP.
There, I'm actually going to stay on that tone. I'm just sort of wondering, the video seems to show you calling the vaccine, saying it wasn't trying to stop the spread and instead was about controlling the population. Do you believe the vaccine science?
So look, clearly, in my opinion, what needs to be done in this province is we need to make sure that our healthcare system is good, that it's available. One of the things that bothered me the most about Dr. Bonnie Henry is the fact that she would not let our unvaccinated nurses and doctors back into the system. I think that was a horrendous problem, especially when we got ER closures and problems with healthcare. But today, I've got to tell you, when you ask the average person today about the issues that they're being faced, what they're being faced with right now is putting food on the table and paying the rent. And that's what we're focused on, is doing everything we can to help with that affordability. That's why this announcement this morning is so important.
Okay, so do you regret getting the vaccine, as said in that video?
So like I say, the most important thing that we are focused on, and I think if you were to ask anybody around certainly in Surrey, but in places around the province, the one thing that they are most focused on right now is the fact that they're struggling with their day-to-day costs. 1 in 2 people are thinking about leaving this province. They're thinking about leaving because they can't afford to be here. That's why we're focused on this. That's why doing this announcement is so important.
Do you mind explaining the circumstances around that video?
Sorry, I haven't seen the video you're referring to, so.
Yeah, thank you.
That's BC Conservative leader John Rustad speaking and responding to questions from reporters this morning. Now, the video shared by the NDP is an edited version of a video posted online by the BC Public Service Employees for Freedom, which is a group of former workers who believe they were discriminated against because they did not get vaccinated. More to come on that story throughout the day here on CBC. And we are continuing to take your calls on what is important to you in this provincial election. Again, our numbers, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Sally is joining us from Vancouver. Hi, Sally.
Oh, hi. Good afternoon.
Hi. What's important to you?
What's important to me is our strata system. There are many issues in stratas right now, and there's very little control over that. And in fact, the plan is to build so many more stratas, hardly any individually owned buildings, and yet the conditions of the requirements, it's really bad. I mean, the CRT is ungoverned and ungovernable. Basically,
Pardon me, what is the CRT?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Civil resolution.
Oh, the Civil Resolution Tribunal. Okay,
yeah,
yes.
And people who are appointed to it, they're typically appointments through the government. They're not people who necessarily have experience. They don't have individual cases that are then referred to like you would in a court system. It says no lawyers are required, but now if you go in without a lawyer, you're really in trouble. And I think part of what has happened with that is that the personal injury lawyers who were put out of jobs when they no longer...
Okay, when they changed the auto insurance system.
Exactly. So then they have this job they've now...
Right. Well, that I don't know about. Well, what do you want to see change, Sally?
Well, what I would like to see is a governability of the CRT, that there is a... number one, building codes are not completely shattered in order to build more. Also that the CRT has a governability, that they aren't completely, no decision follows another decision. You can say anything. And then sometimes those people are involved in redeveloping decisions that they've made. It's
More oversight.
More oversight.
Okay.
And I guess I would like to mention how last week in Australia, which has the only other strata system in the world, there was a really big uncovering of what's going on here, kickbacks with insurance companies and property managers. It's been found out and
so that's a story in Australia that's taking place. Okay, Sally, thank you very much. So changes to the strata system and more oversight for the Civil Resolution Tribunal. Thank you for your call. Housing, no doubt a top issue in this election. And this morning we heard about the Rustad rebate that John Rustad unveiled, which was going to be exempting up to $3,000 per month in housing costs from the provincial income tax. And NDP leader David Ee spent the weekend touting his party steps on housing. Now, for her perspective, I'm joined by Stephanie Allen, who's a principal at Adinkra Strategies and a development strategist and former vice president of BC Housing. Hello, welcome back to the program.
Hi, Michelle.
Well, what do you make right now? How about there's so many announcements and promises. What to you is the most important step that needs to be taken right now on housing?
Yeah, I think if it was a movie, I'd call it Too Fast, Too Furious. It's a lot coming at us. And I think what's most important is that this crisis knows no political bounds. It does not single out people by their identity according to who they support. It's hitting everyone. And so what we need to see are parties really skip past just problem identification and sound bites and really take on this very complicated, very complex system and come up with solutions that make sense, that really address this spectrum of issues. We're seeing great proposals coming out of the BC Nonprofit Housing Association about how many housing units need to be built per year for what income. So they're looking at 12,500 units a year for people making $50,000 and less. Like, these are the tangible things that we need to see done, as well as, real collaboration. It's a system. We're all a part of it. So we all need to see folks working together.
So in terms of the Too Fast, Too Furious, lots of announcements coming. What do you make of them then?
Well, I think what I see is that we're in a political campaign and they have ears from people for just a few seconds. So it's governance by a soundbite. When we need deep root system analysis and solutions that address the root causes. We have growing homelessness because we have growing housing unaffordability. We have something that used to be primarily for human shelter that is now an investment vehicle. Those things are at odds with each other. And an entire supply chain that is trying its best to get housing built, but we have one winner every single time, and those are the banks. Where's their role in contributing to affordable housing? What's their job? We want to see politicians go after these big, gnarly conversations, but they're not doing it. They're focused on sound bites, which is not what we need in governance.
You talk about housing as investment vehicle. This morning, one of the policies we've heard that's been announced or that's been implemented by the NDP and government was the short-term rental restrictions a few months ago. This morning, we see the BC Real Estate Association coming out saying it's calling for a review of that policy, saying that various people have kind of been caught up in it. Medical employees who have to travel, those who are receiving medical care in urban areas, people who work in film. So that's coming from the BC Real Estate Association. And last week we heard about a study that was commissioned by the BC Hotel Association from a professor saying, this is working. What is your take on that kind of policy?
Well, I think what we're looking at is competing interests. We have people that need to travel for business reasons and they need to have a place to stay. Great. We need them to have shelter. But we also need people to be able to live where they work and have a housing that's affordable where they work. If they've been in a community for a very long time, I've got renter neighbors that have been in the Broadway corridor for 30 years. They're afraid now that their homes are going to be redeveloped and they won't be able to live in the communities that support them. So we actually need to take a real hard look at what are the competing interests and what are the solutions for those competing interests, not to pit people against each other, but really look at solutions. We want economic development. We want people to be able to come here for work, to travel for work, all of those things. I've done it in my own career. But we also need people to have stable housing that they're not constantly feeling is under threat.
So how do we have those conversations amid this election, after the election?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, competitive processes don't really set a table for that. So I think we've got to set tables outside of it. And then we've got to work on our innovation outside of that. I'll tell you this, everyone I talk to that I work with in the private sector, the public sector, we're all focused on being a part of the solution. You know, gone are the days where people think that this is just an isolated problem that they're not a part of. Right across the supply chain, architects, builders, everybody in the private sector, as well as, of course, the community housing sector, they want to be a part of it. And I think we're going to have to set our own tables, and then we feed back to government, because I'll tell you this, having worked in government, we're not the birthplace of innovation. We're not the birthplace of creativity. What we do is usually see creativity and innovation and adopt it. So I think that's really what's going to have to be. It's going to have to be the community moving and then bringing along the politicians to catch up.
Is that happening now? Do you see the nonprofit sector, developers, investment owners, homeowners, or renters? Do you see them come to a
It's
table?
starting, and some people are setting some great tables. I have clients that I work with that are recognizing the issues and trying to solve for the issues. I've heard about communities already in BC that are coming together going, you know what, when we submit proposals to BC Housing for funding, we're competing with each other. What if we got together and created a more democratic process? You go, I go, we take turns, we're not spending our money inefficiently, and we have more surety about getting funded. BC Housing is doing a great job, you know, funding housing units every year. But for every unit that's approved, there's many units that are not getting approved. And what are those nonprofit organizations supposed to do? Sit and wait for another proposal call. This funding is this big, the need is this big. We have to have solutions in the margins. That's where I think we're really going to get some better traction.
Okay, well, I appreciate you having this conversation with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
That is Stephanie Allen joining us, and we're going to keep talking more about solutions to housing, to all the issues that you think are important in this provincial election. Taking your calls, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Stephanie Allen, principal at Adinkra Strategies, a development strategist and former vice president of BC Housing. Let's take a call now. Johanna is waiting on at Kootenay Lake. Hi, Johanna.
Hi.
Hi, and you want to talk about education as well.
I do. Yeah, I really feel like it's actually a huge election issue that should be front and center. Properly educating our children actually affects many other issues down the line, including all sorts of Indigenous issues if we properly educate our children, and including climate change. And so I feel like we need to better fund our education, and better fund especially inclusion education, which is a really important, wonderful idea that is currently being severely underfunded, which is affecting the education of all students.
And do you see, tell me more about that. Why do you not see it being discussed sufficiently?
Well, right now I feel like a lot of people don't know or understand what inclusion education is. And I feel like it is such an important key issue in how we're able to educate our children. I think it's so important to have inclusive education where we include not only people with disabilities, but people with behavior issues, people with all sorts of other things going on, including trauma, which is very big in our education system right now. And I feel like if we aren't properly funding those children and supporting them by having enough adults in the room to keep everybody safe and to actually support all children, so supporting those kids to be able to be in the classroom in a functional way, and to support the other kids to have those students in the classroom in a functional way. I feel like it's really misunderstood and not being properly funded currently.
Joanna, thank you very much for your call, talking about funding for education and inclusive education as well. Heidi is up next now in Surrey, wanting to talk about seniors issues. Hi, Heidi.
Hello.
Thanks for calling. What's important to you in this election?
Well, first of all, unfortunately, I'm the name they gave me and many other people were political orphans, because we do not know where to put our vote since the middle of the road party kind of collapsed. Now, my biggest issue is Mr. Ee, Premier Ee, made a big announcement which kind of went under the radar. People, especially seniors that live in strata, have been told that we could no longer have any rulings about 55 and over strata living. And I think Mr. Ee was grandstanding, telling people that this would help with the housing crisis. And what he didn't realize or didn't care to mention, that even when we're forced to rent our units or disregard the 55 and over rule, wouldn't really help with the housing because people, again, have to pay for the living space, and the strata units are reasonably, they usually have 2 bedrooms, bathroom, etc., and they would probably rent, I would think, between $2,000 and $3,000, so that wouldn't help.
This is an interesting, so you bring up, this is a couple of years ago, I think, when the NDP government brought in changes, kind of removing the age restrictions, right, on strata.
No, that was just as soon as Mr. Ee became our premier, and nobody has mentioned it since, and it's caused a lot of problems already. Not in my complex, because ours isn't 55 and over.
Right.
But friends that live in senior complexes, all of a sudden the units are rented because an investor has bought the unit and rented it out.
Heidi, can I ask you, just going back to when you called yourself a political orphan, or that's kind of been the term, how do you feel then about voting in this election?
Well, I immigrated to this country 68 years ago, couldn't wait to get my citizenship, and voted ever since. I lived all over Canada, and it's my privilege to vote and my responsibility. But I cannot vote for Mr. Ee, and I definitely can't vote for the Conservatives, because I believe in the COVID shots. I believe in a lot of things that don't fit with my conscience, should I say. So I have no one to vote for, because, as you know, the middle-of-the-road party is no longer in existence. So I have kind of a conundrum, and I feel bad about it. And many seniors, of course, because I'm a senior, I know a lot of seniors, they feel the same way.
Heidi, very good to hear from you as well. Thank you so much for calling in.
Thank you.
Talking about seniors' issues and that where she falls on the political spectrum. Well, we're going to hear now on the public safety issue that's being raised by downtown business groups. Jeff Bray is Executive Director of the Downtown Victoria Business Improvement Association and President of the Business Improvement Areas of BC. I spoke with him earlier about his biggest concern.
Whether we look at the members we have about 1,700 businesses as our members in downtown Victoria, or if we look at the Provincial Association of Business Improvement Areas, the same issue is dominant for all main streets and downtowns, and that's the whole issue around street safety, street disorder, crime, and the perception of safety that really impacts people's desire to visit the commercial business districts. Clearly the top issue.
Right. And so despite, we hear that crime statistics are down in Vancouver, for example, you're talking about the perception of safety. What's been the impact on your members, and what do you see in Victoria?
Well, certainly I think there's a few things there. The first is that we know that just given the sheer number of times somebody goes into a store and grabs an item off the shelf and leaves, that those just don't get reported. So we think that for those types of crime, which all are impactful, they just don't get reported. Either there's no real point. In many cases, these are individuals who've been arrested over 100 times. They're well known, and yet they're back on the streets. So I think there's a degree of underreporting that happens simply because of that. So the impact on those things, or somebody smashes a front window, those are all costs that the business owner has to absorb and ultimately pass on to you and I as consumers. The second impact is, And what many business owners are talking about is keeping their employees safe and feeling safe. Nobody should be nervous about going to work in a retail store or in a hotel lobby or whatever the case may be. And so, it has a real impact on people's well-being, sense of safety. Then the sort of third issue is people say, I don't really want to come downtown. It sort of looks a bit sketchy here. I just don't feel comfortable. So I'm going to make alternate shopping decisions. And so it impacts foot traffic for businesses. And, fewer people walking into your business means fewer revenues. Fewer revenues mean, you have to lay people off or ultimately decide whether or not it's worth, renewing your lease when it comes up. So it has a multiple series of negative impacts. And businesses are exhausted. They're just exhausted. And, these are people who care about their communities, they're invested in their communities, but quite frankly, they're just at their wits' end. So they're really looking for both long-term solutions that invest in the health and well-being of the people we see on the streets, but immediate action right now to make the streets cleaner and safer for people. And they're looking for that kind of bold leadership.
What do you make of what you've been hearing so far from the various parties on the issue of public safety?
Well, I would certainly say that, with respect to the BC Conservatives, they sort of have, stated positions for several months around the issues around, street disorder and crime and taking sort of actions around, dealing with mental health, dealing with repeat offenders. I think what we're hearing certainly is that the NDP party has made some rather significant shifts in their policy in recent weeks that suggests that they too are hearing that on the doorsteps. It's not just the sort of quote-unquote business community. It's actually citizens, and it's around the province. And I think that finally, both major parties are saying, okay, we're hearing from the public that enough's enough and what the current approach is not working and we need to be doing some things differently.
Jeff, thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Jeff Bray is president of the Business Improvement Areas of BC. Thanks so much for all of your calls and for joining us.